Hello, everybody. I think we can get started. I just wanted to give people a few minutes to come on in. I'm Catrina Brown, President of the DFA. I think most of you probably know who I am at this point. So good evening, and thank you for coming out to the latest event in the DFA's Issues of Higher Education discussion series. We're very pleased to offer these and to be involved in the kind of conversation that they invoke. We chose this topic for tonight's discussion because we believe that there's a close link between academic freedom and the role of faculty members in university decision-making. The Canadian Association of University Teachers, better known as CAUT, defines academic freedom as the right to teach, learn, study, and publish free of orthodoxy or threat of reprisal and discrimination. Academic freedom includes the right to criticize the university and the right to participate in its governance. The second part of the CAUT definition makes it clear that faculty must have meaningful input into the decisions that affect them, their research, and their students. Unfortunately, we believe that both these aspects of academic freedom, decision-making power, and the right to speak out without fear of retribution are being seriously eroded in today's university environment, which is increasingly market-driven. Here in Halifax, there have been two concrete examples over the past few months. At Dalhousie, the administration's handling of the situation in the Faculty of Dentistry had the effect of silencing the Senate, at least some people felt. And as well, at St. Mary's, the Board of Governors' refusal to allow faculty input into the selection of the new university president, a case which is currently on the way to an arbitration board. There are other examples. For instance, the high-profile firing of a dean at the University of Saskatchewan last year for speaking out against program prioritization received national media coverage and led to the departure of the university provost, president, and board chair. More recently, there were two different situations at the University of Manitoba, one involving the undermining of faculty and students in the economics department who didn't take a mainstream approach to economics, and the other related to administrative interference in the duties and research of academic staff in the Faculty of Architecture. And at McMaster University, a group of current and former business professors are going to court to challenge disciplinary actions that were taken by the university after they opposed decisions taken by the then Dean of Business. These and other attempts to silence the academy are closely linked to other trends in university governance and administration: corporatization, program prioritization, cutbacks to academic programs, and the replacement of retired tenured faculty by growing numbers of precariously employed contract academics, as well as just generally, of course, not hiring tenure-track faculty and relying on contract academics. And in many universities, including Dalhousie, this is happening alongside increased spending on capital projects and enormous growth in layers of administration and bureaucracy. Some of you may have been at the Mount this morning. I was there with some other DFA folks. So we listened to the Minister of Labour and Advanced Education talk about the results of the recent government consultation on post-secondary education. I was struck by the different stories that she tells about universities in Nova Scotia than many of us might tell. The DFA had actively participated in the consultation process, attending focus group meetings and submitting a brief. And while some of our concerns were mentioned in the government's written report, they weren't mentioned at all in the highlights presented by the minister today. Instead, her focus was on encouraging us all to do a good job in playing our part in absorbing financial cuts and building greater alliances with business. She advises us we need to make universities more sustainable by cutting spending even more, although we know that the cuts to programming, to academic program, are almost down to the bone, and how partnerships with the private sector should play an even greater role in education. She emphasizes universities being accountable for their spending, but not about being accountable for how well they carry out their core mission of teaching and research. There appears to be a growing paradigm conflict about what universities are and what they should be. There's also growing concern among faculty across Canada of the empowerment of senates, traditionally responsible for matters related to academic programming. Boards of governors, whose primary responsibility is supposed to be fiscal, have too often taken over the decisions that should be made by Senate. Noam Chomsky, the American linguist and philosopher, dealt with these issues in a recent speech to contract academics in Pittsburgh. He compared the business model of today's university to that of Walmart, increasingly dependent on precarious labor, obsessed with the financial bottom line, and ensuring that its employees are docile and obedient. The need for control, the antithesis of academic freedom, is one of the reasons for the control, or the growth rather, in the power of boards of governors and senior administrations. As Chomsky put it, you have to control people. In order to control people, you have to have an administrative force that does it. Tonight, we have three panelists. We're very pleased, who are ideally placed to talk to some of these issues. I'm going to introduce each panelist. James Turk is a distinguished visiting professor at Ryerson University and is establishing the university's new Center for Free Expression, the first at any university in Canada. He's also adjunct research professor at the Institute of Political Economy at Carleton University. From 1998 until last June, he served as executive director of the Canadian Association of University Teachers, and most of us are very familiar with Jim and his work at COUT. Prior to joining COUT, Jim was an associate professor of sociology at the University of Toronto, specializing in Canadian studies, and director of the labor studies program at University College. He also has held several senior staff posts in the Canadian trade union movement. He's written extensively on education, academic freedom, university governance, civil liberties, commercialization of universities, and related public policy issues. His most recent book is Academic Freedom and Conflict, the Struggle Over Speech Rights in the University. And Letitia Meynell is an associate professor of philosophy and gender and women's studies at Dalhousie, specializing in philosophy of science, epistemology, and feminist philosophy. She currently serves on the University Senate, representing the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, and has been an important voice for giving the Senate a stronger role in governance. Earlier this year, Dr. Meynell was one of 5 faculty members who launched a call for an independent investigation into sexualized violence on campus in the wake of the situation involving the male dentistry students' Facebook group, and has written about the issue in the Globe and Mail. And last but not least, Victor Catano is a professor of psychology at St. Mary's University. He's a past president of the Canadian Association of University Teachers and a past chair of COUT's Academic Freedom and Tenure Committee. At the provincial level, Dr. Catano served as president of the Nova Scotia Confederation of Faculty Associations during the 1980s and worked to make it an effective provincial lobbying organization during the first days of rationalization in Nova Scotia. He has served as both president and chief negotiator for his own faculty association and has served on almost every university committee, including the Board of Governors. As a psychologist, Dr. Catano has published on the psychology of unions and maintains an active research program on union-related issues. So I'm going to now invite Jim Turk to come to the podium and provide some of his insights on these issues, which he'll be followed by Letitia Meynell and Vic Catano, and then we'll just hold our questions until everyone's had a chance to speak.
See if this works. It works. Thank you very much, Catrina. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the invitation. I decided that the title for my talk, Silence in the Academy, which I was going to adopt the title of this session, was in fact too kind to what's happening, and prefer a little more direct disfiguring the academy, because I think that's what is going on. Universities come in many different shapes and styles and types across Canada and around the world. But there are a few things that make universities unique. The first is their mission. Universities, unique among educational institutions, in addition to teaching and service, have as part of their mission the advancement of knowledge. As well, there are institutional traditions that enable the mission of the university. One of these is an organizational structure in which academic decisions are made by the academic community. And the second is that the employment relationship in which one's duty is to the mission, not to the employer. We call the first of those collegial governance, and we call the second of those academic freedom. All of them are being undermined currently. This shouldn't be news to us. There's a massive literature. I put a little bibliography in the back of some of it, usually under the heading of corporatization. We haven't found a better term to capture all of these different things that have been happening, but these are some of the books that have been written about it over the last 20 or 30 years. So it shouldn't be a surprise to us, but I want to talk about what's actually happening now under the three headings I mentioned. First, the undermining of advancement of knowledge as a key part of our mission. It's a distinctive university mission. It's difficult when research is not part of the job description of a growing percentage of academic staff. We don't have good data in Canada about what percentage of staff are in what at CT we call contract academic staff, sometimes referred to sessional, sometimes part-timers. That's often misleading because they often teach more than a full-time load to make half what a full-timer makes. They're called adjuncts some places, but what they all have in common is they're on a contract as opposed to regular academic staff who are in tenure track or tenured positions. We don't have good data in Canada. Statistics Canada in the 1990s stopped collecting data on part-timers. And then in 2011, I believe it was, stopped collecting data on full-timers. So there are no good data on university teachers available currently. But we do have good data from the United States. The blue line is what percentage of faculty teaching at four-year degree-granting institutions in the United States are tenured. And you can see how that percentage drops from 1975 to 2011, the most recent data that are available. The green bar are the percentage of those in tenure track positions. And you see the percentage of those are declining as well. So currently in the United States, fewer than 30% of faculty teaching in four-year degree-granting institutions are tenured or tenure track. 70%, more than 70% are off the tenure track or in contingent positions. And in Canada, we don't know if it's 40%, 50%, 60%. We have a lot of anecdotes. Unfortunately, the plural of anecdote is not data. And so we certainly know that we're going in the same direction as the Americans. But in addition, we also have the funding for research being reduced. These are the most recent data of what's happened to funding for the three granting councils, the core base funding for the three granting councils from 2007 to now, in real dollar terms. The funding for SSHRC has declined by 10.5%, the funding for NSERC by 4.4%, the funding for CHR by 7.5%. I threw in as well the funding for indirect costs down 2.3%. So much as the Harper government talks about how they're spending more on research and than in any government before, in fact, they're spending less now than they did when they first came to power. This is reflected in the declining success rates. This is the success rate for the main grant within each of the three granting councils. So for SSHRC keeps changing its name, but for what was the standard research grant, the Insight grant, the most recent data is the success rate is 21%. For the Discovery Grant under NSERC, for those of you who aren't natural scientists, NSERC does it differently. You don't apply for a project, you apply as a person, and you get funded. So if your research changes, you carry the money with you. You get smaller amounts of money, but it's spread more widely, and that's fallen from 73% to 59%. And in the health sciences, the success rate is 16%. So you have, if you're applying for a health sciences grant, you know from the outset, 84% chance you're not going to get it. Now, with regard to academic freedom, there are several things happening. Maybe that person doesn't like what I'm saying. Too bad. One is the attempt to narrow the scope of academic freedom. Academic freedom, as we understand it in Canada and as is practiced in Canada and the United States, really had its first iteration in North America in a 1915 statement by the American Association of University Professors that was formed about that time because of the gross abuse of faculty. Faculty who would speak out on one thing, a donor would call the president of the university and say, fire that guy, and they'd fire him. People like John Dewey and others were outraged. They founded the American Association of University Professors, and one of the first things they drafted was a declaration on the principles of academic freedom and academic tenure. And that 1915 statement is one of the best that's been drafted. The AAUP produced a revised version in 1940, and CAT, which was founded in 1951, developed its perspective. What's common to these is four aspects of academic freedom, and it's really essential to understand there's four parts of academic freedom. The first is with respect to your freedom to teach as you professionally think appropriate, not bound to what the president or what a donor or what someone else thinks you should be teaching, within the framework of collegially defined course descriptions and so forth. Second is your academic freedom with regard to your research and scholarly work. The third is what's called intramural academic freedom, and that's your right to be critical of anything that goes on in the institution where you work. Collegial governance, if academic staff are to participate in the governance of their institution, they certainly have to have the right to comment and be critical about anything that's going on in that institution. And the fourth is referred to as extramural academic freedom, and that's your assurance that your exercise as your rights of a citizen cannot be sanctioned by your employer. So, for example, if you participate in a protest and you get arrested, you can't flash your DFA card to the cop and say, I have academic freedom, you can't arrest me. That's not going to go well. But you can be assured, or you should be able to be assured, that Dalhousie will not take action against you for your extramural speech. Now, the Association of Universities and Colleges of Canada, which is the President's Club of the universities, it's the employer group, on its 100th anniversary devised its new statement, updated its 1988 statement, its new statement on academic freedom. And it was appropriate that it did it on its 100th anniversary because they were attempting to take academic freedom back to what it was 100 years ago. Because in their new version, there's no reference to intramural academic freedom, and there's no reference to extramural academic freedom. One of the things they really hate is intramural academic freedom, that is, faculty and academic staff being critical or commenting vigorously on what's going on within their own institution. The second threat to academic freedom is making the workforce, academic workforce, precarious. The very point I had mentioned earlier in terms of what's undermining the ability of academic staff to advance knowledge because people aren't paid to or given support for doing research and scholarship in contract positions typically. They're also, when you're in a precarious position, your exercise of academic freedom is far more difficult. You know, as I was saying earlier, we don't know the proportion of contingent academic, the actual percentage of contingent positions in Canada, but we know the proportion is quite significant. At Carleton University, a study done a decade ago showed that more than half of the course titles taught at the university are taught by contract academic staff. There are faculties of education where 80% of the faculty are contingent. Second point is that all academic staff require academic freedom to do their jobs. Academic freedom is not a perk. It's not a special treat. It's not something that you as elite people get. It's something that academic staff need to be able to do their jobs. You can't teach students properly. You can't do research in the public interest properly unless you have the freedom to do it as you think appropriate professionally. And whether you're in a contingent position or a regular position, you have the same need for academic freedom. The third point is the right to academic freedom is only ensured by collective agreement language. There is no legal right to academic freedom in Canada. Various universities have policies on academic freedom. The University of Toronto has probably the finest policy on academic freedom in the country. But university policies are not enforceable, and the University of Toronto policy was absolutely useless to CUT in two of the most dramatic academic freedom cases in the history of Canada, that of Dr. Nancy Oliveri and of Dr. David Healy. So the only enforceable protection for academic freedom is what's in the collective agreement. But there also has to be job security provisions. So a tenured faculty member, where there are job security provisions, that's what tenure is, means that if they want to get rid of you, they have to make a case that has to go through a formal proceedings, and there's some assurance that it can't be done casually. If you're in a contract position, unless the employer is stupid and say, I'm getting rid of you because of what you said in your class or what you wrote or what you said in the newspaper, they just let your contract expire and can get rid of you. So there needs to be both good academic freedom language and job security language. And the issue is, how can the right of academic freedom be protected and enforced for those in contingent positions? And unfortunately, the answer is not easily. The third aspect of academic freedom that is undermining academic freedom are the attempts by universities increasingly to enforce civility. Now, I want to make a really vital distinction at the start of my comments on civility. And that is, there is no place in a university for violence, for discrimination, nor for harassment. These are illegal. Virtually every collective agreement has language obligating the employer to ensure a discrimination-free and harassment-free workplace. But civility is something different. That is, when incivility gets to the level of harassment or discrimination, then it's dealt with as harassment or discrimination. What universities are doing, though, is blurring the distinction between the two, and I want to just give you a few examples. So universities across the country are introducing what they variously refer to as respectful workplace policies, civil discourse policies, or whatever. So at Brock University, the first statement in their policy is a very sound one. Each individual has the right to participate, learn, and work in an environment that promotes equal opportunities and prohibits all forms of harassment and discrimination. Absolutely right. But then they go on, Brock University and all members of the university share the responsibility of establishing and maintaining a climate of respect within this community and to address any situation in which respect is lacking. Now, maybe the president of Brock University might find what I'm saying about his university disrespectful. I mean, that's the very problem with the nature of this standard. At the University of Toronto, their guideline on civil conduct says the university will not condone uncivil conduct. The guideline is not intended to infringe on academic freedom, they always say that, but rather to describe conduct expected of all members of the community, even when they are exercising their academic freedom. Now, at Ryerson, similarly, they say nothing in this policy shall be construed to impinge upon academic freedom provisions specified in the university collective agreements or policies. However, faculty, instructors, and others who have academic freedom rights have a responsibility to exercise those rights in a civil and respectful manner. Now, what does that mean? Well, that issue of what it means is addressed by these universities. So Brock talks about what personal or psychological harassment do not include. Respectfully expressing disagreement or stating a contrary but reasonable point of view. Now, I think some of the people who don't like my speeches are unreasonable. Legitimate, not discriminatory, arbitrary, or abusive exercise of academic freedom, freedom of thought and inquiry, and expression in teaching and research, which may result in respectful disagreements regarding beliefs or principles. At Ryerson, incivility deals with a broad range of behaviors, including but not limited to unprofessional behavior, rudeness, shouting or swearing, intimidation or bullying, threatening comments or behaviors, unsolicited or unwelcome conduct, comment, oral or written, including email communications, gestures, actions, or contact that cause offense, humiliation, or physical or emotional harm to any individual. Well, that's a pretty much of a dog's breakfast. You know, certainly violent behavior and so on, but rudeness? If I don't say hi to a colleague in the corridor, is that the same as punching the person? At the University of Maryland, they solved the problem for us. They set up a task force that wrote a white paper to solve the problem of what is civility and what is incivility. We define civility simply as niceness to others. In accordance with President Perman's emphasis on playing nice, we believe that niceness may be easily understood by all parties affected. We define incivility as low-intensity, deviant behavior with ambiguous intent to harm the target in violation of university norms for mutual respect. So the problems with civility, it disallows a lot of speech, satire, caricature, hyperbole, aesthetic mockery, polemic, outrage, even anger. I mean, we are serious about what we do and often are quite angry if what we see to be are really so, you know, it would put a lot of people out of business, for example. There's another serious problem with it, and that's the fundamental vagueness of concepts of civility and respect, which allow it to be used by the administration quite arbitrarily. Probably the leading legal expert on free expression in Canada is Professor Jamie Cameron, that's her picture, who teaches at Osgoode Hall Law School. And she has written about this, and she notes, when and in what circumstances another person might take offense at things said in a certain way is unpredictable and highly situational. Civility policies necessarily lend themselves to selective enforcement. Though most will not, some offenders will be singled out for institutional attention. By definition and in practice, even-handed application of this standard is impossible. Short of a pattern of behavior that satisfies definitions of harassment and bullying, mere rudeness or lack of courtesy is just too pervasive and constant to be sensibly regulated. I just want to illustrate what civility policies mean. I'll do it very quickly. Ken Lukehart was teaching at King's University College, which is a federated college at the University of Western Ontario, in a program in peace and let me get it right. Yes, I think it was peace studies, and he was retiring, and there was a great controversy because the program. It's a Catholic university, was in a Catholic liberation theology tradition, and allowed for students each summer to spend a month working with liberation theology priests in Central America. Some of the faculty in the program, newly hired, tenured faculty, were a little uneasy, thought we should have a scaled-down program, less radical, maybe more social working was how it was described. And Ken was quite troubled by that, and it got so bad that the director of the program who'd founded announced he was stepping down. And Ken, just on the day he retired, sent a note to the principal saying, Bernie Hammond, who's directed this program, founded, is really concerned he's left. It'll be crucial that you not appoint two particular faculty, named them, to be the director to replace Bernie, because this is a signature program. They aren't committed to this version of it, and we don't want to see it changed. So I'm leaving, but I wanted to send this. Well, the principal didn't like it. Instead of tearing it up, he sent it to the two faculty named. They filed a complaint under the university's respectful workplace policy. The university hired an outside investigator who'd been a war crimes investigator in Sarajevo, who found that this letter constituted vexatious, unacceptable behavior, and Lukehart was banned from campus for life. Now, CAT investigators stepped in and published a report and embarrassed the university into retracting that. Anna Isla teaches women's studies and sociology at Brock University, was deeply troubled by a concordat that Brock University signed with the Roman Catholic Diocese of St. Catherine's, which allowed two lay brothers from a very conservative Catholic organization to be on campus and to have direct access to students and to involve students in a variety of programs that she was very concerned about. She knew this organization because it had actually, she's an indigenous person from Peru, and it actually had been founded in Peru and was well aware of it and was quite concerned about it. So brought it up forward in women's studies and in sociology. They passed motions that this arrangement should be discontinued. The two lay brothers who ran the program filed complaints against her under the respectful workplace policy. Also complaints before the Human Rights Commission. The Human Rights Commission got it right, saying, this is academic freedom, and dismissed it. The university took it up. Again, CET had to appoint a committee of inquiry, and the university ultimately did the right thing. Or Thomas Docherty. Thomas Docherty is a very senior professor of English, world-famous professor of English at the University of Warwick in the UK, who was suspended indefinitely. It ended up to be for 9 months, because his head of his department filed a complaint under the university's respectful workplace policy, because during job interviews with candidates, he sighed and actually, I have the exact wording here. I keep repressing it because I can't believe it. Inappropriate sighing, making ironic comments, and projecting negative body language. So he was suspended without pay, and it was only when it became a big issue in the Times Higher Education, the main publication in the UK, that the university was embarrassed enough to end this. Or George Rammel, who's the head of sculpture at Capilano University. The president of the university, depicted here, unilaterally, without going through the Senate or any procedures, eliminated a number of programs in the fine arts at Capilano. George said, I'm a sculptor. I make my comments through my sculpture. So he made this caricature of her. She's an American, came from the US to take this job, so that's the flag. The dog is because she also passed a rule that faculty and staff could not bring their pets on campus, although she brought her dog every day. So he made this sculpture. He walked into his studio one day and it was gone. And there was no mystery as to what happened to it, because a statement was put out by the university saying last week, an effigy, this is by the chair of the Board of Governors, last week an effigy of the university president produced by George Rammel was removed from campus on my direction. We must be mindful of the university's obligations to cultivate and protect a respectful workplace in which personal harassment and bullying are prohibited. These obligations are reflected in our employment policies. Our policies are intended to protect the interests of all individuals, including our president. So this was disrespectful of the president, and therefore, so George, the Faculty Association intervened. George, in my view, mistakenly, and at the urging of his faculty association, signed a statement that they gave it back to him. He would not allow it to be on campus again. But it didn't come back, and it didn't come back. It finally came back 53 days later, smashed. And then Stephen Slida is a professor of Indigenous Studies. He was at Virginia Tech. He was offered a professorship at the Indigenous Studies program at the University of Illinois main campus. He resigned his tenured position, as did his partner at Virginia Tech, to take up this position at University of Illinois. Over the summer, the intervening summer, it was when Israel and Palestine were at war. His father is Jordanian. I think his mother is Palestinian. He was deeply troubled by what was happening, tweeted aggressively his horror at what Israel was doing. 2 weeks before his first class was to start, he was advised that he no longer had a job at the University of Illinois, that the board had not affirmed his appointment. Technically, appointments are made by boards. At Illinois, like many universities, they often happen well after the person's taken up their post. It's just a formality. But the chancellor issued a statement. This is 2 weeks before his class was to start. What we cannot and will not tolerate at the University of Illinois are personal and disrespectful words or actions that demean or abuse either viewpoints themselves or those who express them. Unless there was any ambiguity, the chair of the Board of Governors, signed by all the governors, issued a statement the next day saying, earlier today you received a thoughtful statement from Chancellor Phyllis Wise regarding the university's decision not to recommend Professor Slida for a tenured position. As if he was just starting. He'd been offered the job 9 months before, had a contract, had signed it, his pay, and so on. So examples. Finally, with regard to collegial governance. The notion of collegial governance is that the academic community should make academic decisions. At Oxford and Cambridge, you have more or less the pure form of this. There's a body at Oxford called the Congregation. There's a body at Cambridge called Regent House. And that's the final decision-making authority in those two universities. And it's made up of the collected academic staff, full stop. There's no board of governors above them or anything. They are the final decision makers. In Canada, we had a Royal Commission in 1906 that looked at governance, was looking at the governance of the University of Toronto, that proposed a variant of that model, where you'd have a board of governors responsible for financial and administrative decisions and a Senate responsible for academic decisions. And that was the model that was adopted by every university created after that time and retroactively adopted by the existing universities. And it's a model we have today at virtually every university in the country. Now, it may seem fine in theory, but does it work? And for whom? Well, there's a lot of evidence on this. In 1966, there were so many problems with how senates worked that CAUT and the AUCC jointly appointed a task force of two eminent academics, one American, one British, James Duff and Robert Bernal, who traveled Canada to look at what was happening in senates across the country. And what they found could have been written today. The charges that one so often hears today, that universities are becoming so large, so complex, and so dependent upon public funds that scholars no longer form or even influence their own policy, that a new and rapidly growing class of administrators is assuming control, and that a gulf of misunderstanding and misapprehension is widening between the academic staff and the administrative personnel, with grave damage to the functioning of both. So they concluded this was what was happening, and the solution was to reform senates. And they had a whole series of recommendations as to how to do it. Virtually every university in the country adopted them to fix the problem. The theory was great, it just wasn't working in practice. Well, 30 years later, the same problems seemed to exist. So CET appointed the Independent Study Group on University Governance with the attractive acronym of ISGUG. And three quite eminent academics traveled the country looking at what was going on in university governance and seeing, are there problems? If so, what are the problems and how do we fix them? And what they wrote, it was consistently suggested during their hearings that the control of the university had fallen into the hands of an administrative group of senior officials, the president, the vice presidents, the deans, and that this group, in fact, ran the university without any genuine accountability. This was 1993. In 2002, Glenn Jones, who's now a dean at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto, did a study of senates, interviewed senators across the country, and observed that Senate members indicated less satisfaction with the overall work of the Senate, and there were indications of discordance between the role that they believed the Senate should play and the role that they believe the Senate does play within university governance. Less than half of the Senate members view the Senate as an effective decision-making body, though 64% indicated it plays an important role as a forum for discussing issues. I mean, it was not intended initially just to be a forum for discussing issues. It was to be a forum for the academic staff to decide academic issues within the institution. In the US, Benjamin Ginsberg has a very interesting book I'd encourage you to have a look at called The Fall of the Faculty, The Rise of the All-Administrative University. Senate members as recently as the 1960s and 70s in American universities were heavily influenced, if not driven, by faculty ideas and concerns. Today, institutions of higher education are mainly controlled by administrators and staffers who make the rules and set more and more of the priorities of academic life. There's been a lot of studies of university governance. Here's a sample of them, and they all point to versions of the same thing. One of the best studies is Robert Birnbaum's The Latent Organizational Functions of the Academic Senate, Why Senates Do Not Work But Will Not Go Away. So there really is little evidence that the theory that a senior academic body would control the academic decision-making, to which we're all committed because it's a form of worker self-governance, in fact has worked. In fact, there's no evidence that it's worked well for more than 60 years. We see some of the implications of this. Again, no Canadian data. I just want to show you American data. These are the changes in the number of employees in U.S. universities from 1975 to 2011. Full-time, non-faculty administrators, up 396%. Part-time contract academic staff up 286%. Full-time contract academic staff up 259%. Full-time senior administrators up 114%. Full-time regular academic staff up 23%. I find that table tells a big part of the story. So I want to end with what can we do about this? Well, one option is to put our heads in the sand. Another option is to be good academics, say, boy, we need to study this some more. Let's spend the next 5, 10 years studying this. A third option is to be cynical and say, well, I'm going to do my work and the hell with this for everybody else. And the fourth option, the one I obviously prefer, is to take action. And I think there are some actions. So with regard to advancing knowledge, at the bargaining table, it's essential that faculty associations negotiate complement language that will limit the number or the percentage of jobs that don't involve research and scholarship. Beyond the bargaining table, it's really important that we become more effective as academic staff and as individual academics in making the public aware of the costs of underfunding research. With regard to governance, at the bargaining table, we have to negotiate language that secures academic staff viewpoints. The only place where we sit down in equal stature to the administration is at the bargaining table, not in the Senate. Most Senates are rubber stamps for the administration 90% of the time. At the bargaining table, we can negotiate all sorts of things, and we already do. Academic freedom is theoretically an academic matter, but we protect it through collective agreements. We have language on promotion and tenure. We have language on a whole range of things. We need to look more creatively at how we can ensure through our collective bargaining process those things that formerly we might have tried to do through Senates. Beyond the bargaining table, we have to continue to use the Senate as effectively as possible. We just don't have to have the illusion that it's going to work well. We have to do the best we can, but the main place we can protect faculty and academic staff is through the bargaining process. We also have to jealously guard academic staff role in departmental and faculty governance in whatever ways we can. We don't want to open university acts to any provincial government I know in this country, because what we get is worse than what we currently have. So we have to make what we have work as well as it can, plus be much more creative in what we can negotiate at the bargaining table. I'm happy to talk about that in questions. And finally, with regard to academic freedom, at the bargaining table, we have to strengthen existing academic freedom language. Every faculty association in the country has to make sure that all 4 aspects of academic freedom that I talked about are actually written into their collective agreement. We have to negotiate effective complement language. We have to ensure that our language around tenure is secure. There are 3 universities in the country that have permitted post-tenure review, which effectively means there isn't really tenure. That the annual review that is part of a formative process in those 3 universities, if you get a bad review 2 years in a row, even though you're tenured, you can be dumped. And we have to have language that provides proper hiring procedures and job security provisions for those in contractually limited, non-tenure eligible academic positions. Even in universities like Dalhousie, and there are 13 or 14 others where the contract academic staff are in a different union, there are people in the faculty association who are instructors or in other positions where you need to protect their job security, even in some of these universities where they don't have access to tenure. Beyond the bargaining table, we need to vigorously enforce these collective agreement provisions, because there's no point in negotiating if you don't aggressively enforce it. And then, the most important thing that all of us can do is to exercise our academic freedom rights in our teaching, in our research and scholarship, in shaping the university, in speaking out in our own universities when things happen. You know, probably everybody in this room knows what I'm talking about has been happening. I'm not sure how many have ever spoken about it actively and openly and pressed for change. We have to take advantage of the rights that we have, or else the kind of future that all these books are talking about happening to us will indeed be our future. Thank you very much.
I'm just going to welcome Letitia.
Okay, so I'm just going to speak as a philosopher and a Dalhousie senator about my time at the Senate. It's very much sort of my own perspective, what I've seen there. I've done a couple of terms, or I'm partway through the second term, and I did another one a couple of years ago. So yeah, I'll just talk about that. I'm currently on a Principles and Values work group, and that has to do with the current Constitution. So we went through a constitutional change, kind of massive overhaul in March of 2011. That's when it was approved. And we went from, I think it was like a 52-page Constitution to about a 15-page Constitution. And there's a lot that sort of got left out in that. And so one of the things that I thought got left out were principles and values, which, according to the university lawyer, were not important, but I think they are. And there are other senators who thought that they are too. And so this is something that currently we're trying to add to the Constitution, whether it's in terms of a preamble or some separate document that has some status, but thinking about that issue, that aspect. So I'll talk about the current Constitution, I'll talk about the old Constitution and what I think's been lost from it, and then just give some personal reflections on the current situation. Again, very much my own perspective, so I don't speak from the kind of position of authority that Jim has. Okay, so the current Constitution was rewritten by a team and passed by Senate, ostensibly to modernize the Constitution, make it in line with Canadian constitutions across the country, and take out the irrelevant stuff. The irrelevant stuff was basically seen as the stuff that wasn't legally binding. So you'll notice that a bunch of the information about relationships was taken out of the new Constitution because it was said, well, you know, you can't force someone else to have a relationship with you, right? So you can't mandate a relationship. So we should take out all this language that had been in the old Constitution. Some of us were worried about what the changes would mean to Senate powers. So, you know, we went through this change in the context that Jim's talking about, and so you're not really sure how changing the rules, what it's really going to mean when it hits the ground, and so we were worried about that. And there was an ongoing discussion within a group that I was a part of about whether the Senate as a whole is where the real power is, or whether the power of Senate is in Senate committees, right? And that's something which I still don't feel like I know or understand. I would hope both. Both would have power. Oh, I'm just going to quickly show you what this new Constitution looks like. Just some relevant bits of it. Whoops. One of the things, probably people can't see this here, but one of the things that has changed is there's just mention of the original statutes. Another thing that's interesting is a section B where it says the intention of the new Constitution is to codify the existing balance of power between the Senate and the board. And so my understanding of that was that this new Constitution doesn't actually change anything. All of the intent in the old Constitution is still there. It's just we're not going into all that gory detail, that 52 pages of gory detail. Another thing that's interesting, which is in the new Constitution as well as the old one, is the idea that the faculties of the university are committees of Senate, right? Which I don't think we often experience that. That doesn't seem to be the way in which the university works, but it's right in the new Constitution as well as the old one, so that's strange to me. Again, we have this idea that the regulations on academic and research matters, that is the role of the Senate, subject to approval of the board. although the language in the old Constitution is actually a bit stronger about that. And I'm just going to point out 1.2Q, as it played a recent role in the dentistry stuff. I think that's what I'm going to call it now, the dentistry stuff. I don't know if there's a better name for it. But there was certainly events around this particular clause. I can see Alan having flashbacks. Okay. So what was lost was principles and values. There's mentioned the statutes. There's mentioned that, yeah, academic governance, that's what the Senate does. But then it's really just a list of rules as to how we do stuff. And you'll see with some of the old Constitution, there's much more around that. There's also a lack of understanding of the role of Senate. I tend to think that that's crucial to the principles of values. That's where you sort of say, how do we envision ourselves, right? What's the big picture? What are we fundamentally doing here instead of what's the day-to-day business of how we go about doing things, right? So my sense was that the very exact rules that we have in the new Constitution miss out the big picture, and that has an effect of stopping people from thinking about how they engage in a big picture kind of way, which I think senators need to do. So I'll just point out the old Constitution here with particular emphasis on a few sections that point to this relationship, and the organization chart, which is kind of fun to compare with more recent ones. Oh, sorry, that's the new provost decision structure chart. You'll see Senate's at the top with the Board of Governors, and we get filtered through the president to the president's executive. And then where we've got focus on academic mission and impact, alignment of resources, this is where the Provost Committee, which I still don't feel I completely understand, and Dean's Council is operating, and Senate's kind of off in this corner. This is the Provost decision structure. I think there's still an interesting question about what the relationship is of this new committee to the Senate. We keep going back to that in Senate meetings, but I still don't feel like I understand it. Compare that with what the old structure was, and this is again in the old Constitution. And here we go, right? And so we've got the Board of Governors, the President's Office, and the Senate Chair and Vice Chairs, coming down to the centers and institutes, departments and schools, colleges and faculties. So it's fairly clear that the Senate's right at the heart of things in that vision. Just scrolling down to the relationship with I'll go to the statutes first. Statutes of Nova Scotia are really kind of interesting. Remember, in the new Constitution, there's just a line saying these are the things that govern us. Statutes in Nova Scotia, but a bunch of the relevant ones were given pride of place in the old Constitution. And they mentioned things like a yearly meeting with the board by a handful of members of Senate and constant consultation with the board, right, on issues that are relevant to both groups doing their job. I'm going to whip through that. And then this is all just about officers. Here we get to the good stuff. Relations with faculties, right? So here we have a very strong statement about saying much of the academic policy making takes place within faculties and their councils, begins in departments, schools, and it's supposed to sort of filter up, right? So that's what, and again, this idea that faculties are committees of Senate, which is in the new and the old Constitution. Then we have the relation with the Board of Governors that has some nice language about recognizing that we've both got our jobs to play, but the normal obligation of the board, I've got sort of interesting stuff in yellow and really important stuff with the red box. The normal obligation of the board is to ratify and support the Senate's academic policies and other decisions, right? So it really is just a check. That's the understanding. And again, this is supposed to be implicit in the new Constitution as well, or that's the way I read it anyway. Then we have relation with the administration. You gotta love this. Senior administrative officers of the university are as accountable to the Senate for the administration of matters falling within the Senate's jurisdiction as they are to the board, right? So they are supposed to be working as we tell them to, basically, right? The Senate's supposed to be setting the academic mission, making policies, priorities, and then we say, hey, senior administration, it's your job to help us do this, right? So the president's talked about, yes, he doesn't think things should just be top down, they should be bottom up also, but I tend to feel they should be bottom up, period, right? I mean, it's a faculty and the students who fulfill the mission of the university, and we're probably in the best position to know how to do that effectively. And, there are obviously times where a president can help us make connections and things like that, but if he's setting the priorities, there's no reason to think that that's going to be effective for helping us do our jobs well, right? It's just stands to reason. Anyway. And then here's another interesting thing. Again, this was taken out of the old Constitution, or taken out for the new Constitution, rather, because of this idea that the Senate can't mandate. We can't tell the DFA to talk to us. So we shouldn't have any language there about our intention to collaborate with the DFA. But in the old Constitution, it was there. It is understood that the Senate must be receptive to DFA proposals in the areas of mutual concern. Right? It's evident that the Senate and the DFA have common interests in the areas noted, so that it has to do with things like appointments, academic freedom, is the stuff that influences our jobs, and that we want a system of consultation between representatives of the two bodies. That's going to be desirable. Okay, so those are the key things that got left out, in my view, of the new Constitution. I mean, I think it's there implicitly, but unless you have it explicitly, we forget. And we did forget. I mean, I would say the current Senate forgot that stuff. And so, you need to put it back there. Right. So personal reflections. Here's something everyone's going to agree with. Too much of the resources of the university, financial and human, are spent on internal service and administration. Hooray, you're all supposed to cheer at that point. I think we really need to have a model where we see every work hour and every dollar that's spent away from teaching, research, and service to our communities as a cost to the university, right? It's always a cost, every moment. I don't think we actually need to be in an oppositional relationship with the administration. I think we're maybe at a point where we've almost forgotten how to get along, and we are no longer seeking collaboration. I think we always have to start in a context where we seek collaboration first, see if we can make it work, rather than getting in an oppositional mindset from the start. I think we also need to deal with the innovation fetish, which is overtaking everything so far as I can see. Every change is a cost, right? Every change is a cost in terms of having to learn it, right? And so if you keep on changing stuff when it doesn't clearly benefit in some way or other, you're creating a cost. Okay, so here I wanted to point to some recent places where I think affecting the relationships that are supposed to be there could have proven more efficient just for the functioning of the university. One of them is the divestment issue, right? I mean, if the Senate and the Board of Governors is supposed to be meeting every October, once a year, right, at least in a little group, if, as is in the old Constitution and in the statutes, whenever there's something that's of concern to both parties, we should get together and talk about it, right? If we'd done that, then I think we probably would have had a more efficient, effective, and desirable response to the divestment question. At least it wouldn't be coming up again, right? So the Board of Governors dealt with it, and now the Senate's trying to deal with it too, and that that just seems crazy. And if the Senate says we have to divest, what the hell is the board going to do at this point, right? You know, we've kind of created this potential for conflict in a completely unnecessary way. The Belong report, I think, you know, the DFA recently came out and said, look, you cannot have mandatory training for people that changes the terms of contracts. That's clearly right. But at the same time, I suspect that the DFA and the people who put that report together share many of the same concerns and values about inequality and discrimination at Dalhousie. And so clearly, it seems to me that that strategic initiative should have been carried out in conversation with the DFA. It's just seems to me ridiculous that it wasn't. I think we don't know how much power Senate has, because my experience in the Senate is, by and large, we refuse to enact our power or even try, right? I think mostly we're quite passive as senators. I think there's a tendency for us to see Senate as a rubber stamping body, and so then it attracts people who just, you know, are trying to get the service and don't want to have a conversation, aren't willing to have a conversation, aren't willing to really educate themselves about the issues. I was dismayed, it's my perception at least, that a lot of senators really did not know some of the basic stuff about the dentistry situation when we were talking about it, right? They just didn't know basic information that was in the media. And I think it's kind of a reflection of the people who are there. They're there to rubber stamp, at least some of them. And you get this kind of feedback loop. If the Senate isn't seen to do anything, doesn't try to do anything. I worry about the strategic initiatives and how that's been created as a sort of provost thing to do, right? We've got this new provost committee, and the provost seems to be in charge of getting the strategic initiatives done. I'm right about that, Alan, right? That's the way it's supposed to go. Yeah, and so first of all, I'm worried about the power issues of that, right, in this context of where we're supposed to be self-governing. And I'm also worried about the inefficiencies. So far as I can see, the strategic initiatives boil down to excellence in teaching, excellence in research, and excellence in service. And I think we already know that we're doing that, right? We know that that's our job, and I can't help feeling that the Senate committees are already working on that stuff. So I worry about repeating labor. Again, I see every hour spent in those committees as a cost away from doing research, teaching, and service to the broader community. And so I care about not repeating work. We shouldn't be repeating labor. And so, you know, there's those questions about power and inefficiencies that bother me. There's the academic administrative arms race in North America. I take this term from Peter Scotch, who talks about a metastasis of vice presidents. You know, you've got like a murder of crows, a pride of lions, and a metastasis of vice presidents. This kind of tendency to keep on pluralizing, to making more and more administrative posts is troubling. And sometimes it's not very clear to me which administrative posts are doubling up at the university. That's getting kind of weird. I do worry about how much we're spending on consultants. I don't know if there's an answer to that, but every time there's we get a new consultants report, I think, how much did that one cost? How much is the PR company that's supposed to be helping with the dentistry situation costing? I'd like to know, and I think it's actually the business of Senate to know that stuff, isn't it? Surely. I worry about Newspeak and the professional management style. So, you know, cynically, I think, and I may be being unfair to the president, but my sense of the way he consults from the 100 Days of Listening report and another context is that he decides what he wants to do. He talks with people. He figures out the language that folks are going to find acceptable for what he wants to do anyway. and then he tells us that it's all our idea. That's been my very limited experience, but that's been my experience with consultation. And again, it may be unfair, but that's just, again, my perspective. That's what it looks like to me. The question of which self and self-governance. So I was struck when the president said at one of the Senate meetings that he understood self-governance in terms of the university, whatever that means, governing itself, and not the provincial government deciding how the university behaves. Because my understanding of self-governance was always that it's faculty self-governance, right? That's what self-governance means. And then I heard Martha Crago saying, well, no, what matters with self-governance is that it's not the Board of Governors who's deciding how things go. And so I actually don't think we understand what self-governance is. Some lessons from the dentistry scandal. So the 1.2Q initiative, again, I just showed you that part of the Constitution. This was the concern over whether the Faculty of Dentistry should be doing the investigation into the misconduct of the dental students. And a number of us thought that that was a bad idea for all kinds of reasons. And so we tried to use a part of the Constitution to basically intervene there and say, no, we need to take it out of the hands of the Faculty of Dentistry and the ASCC and put it in the hands of the Senate. And that failed. To be fair, it was Senate's will, right? This is what senators decided. So a group tried and we failed. I think there is worries about the Student Code of Conduct and the failure of the complaint under the Student Code of Conduct, which a couple of senators and other faculty members put forward, in part because if faculty members can't use that code, then who can? I mean, I think there's real questions about how we're functioning here. And I do worry that the presidential task force, that the Constance Backhouse report, that's, you know, we tried to suggest that it should be done in collaboration with Senate, but did not achieve that. And I find it just troubling insofar as it seems like a clearly good idea to get the Senate on board, but for whatever reason, the president didn't want to do that. And so there's this sort of implicit power politics that seems to be going on behind it that I don't really understand. Oh yeah, and the role of lawyers. So the university lawyer is the Senate lawyer, right? That was made very, very clear to us. And there are worries, I think, about conflict of interest. I'm sure Jim would know more about this, that, you know, given that she seems to mostly be acting for the administration, that's the way it seems to me anyway, then if Senate and the administration or members of the administration in an oppositional position, then, you know, our lawyer may be in a conflict of interest. Opportunities. The president has said he wants to decentralize power. He claims that the provost model is a component of this, so let's take him at his word, right, and try to actually make a difference. We got a big turnover of deans happening right now, and I think, in part from our experiences in FAS recently, that perhaps it's a really good idea to make sure that our deans are not coming from outside, but belong within our faculties, come from our faculties, represent the faculties, and will be going back there and will have to face their colleagues with the decisions that they make. Because I have worries about our past dean. Let's see what we can do if we give a crap, right? So, you know, I think there's been a sense that Senate isn't doing anything. So if we get a whole bunch of people who are committed to the values, to the ideals of a Senate, let's see what they can do if they're actually there. I think our cynicism is justified, obviously, from what Jim was talking about, but I don't think it's productive. So let's see what we can change. We're coming up to our 200th anniversary. So it's kind of a good moment for recollection, for soul searching, for asking ourselves what kind of institution are we in and what kind of institution do we want to be in, and is there a better way forward? So I think we also need to start collaborating more with our kind of sister institutions. So obviously student unions are very good at doing this. I actually don't know about faculty associations in Nova Scotia. But senates, I don't know if we've ever done this, really sort of trying to see what's going on with other Senate bodies across the province and collaborating and trying to work more with the government to make us effective in actually supporting the futures initiative that they have. Right. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you.
One more.
I just want to introduce Vic Catano.
Here. Here we go. There we go. First of all, let me thank DFA for inviting me here. And if my voice sounds a little rough at times, I'm getting over this 3-week cold that seems to have inflicted the university community. And if I start hacking away, I'm okay. Don't call an ambulance. I'll be fine.
You're not contagious.
Hopefully by now, no. Hopefully. And the other thing I should say is I'll be talking a bit about the presidential search at St. Mary's. And I want to make it clear that I am not in no way going to be critical of the product of that search, but the process of the search. And he's your current Dean of Arts, who will be our president come July 1st. And we know very little about him, and that's because of the way that the search was carried out. And in thinking about all this, I thought, what ties all this together? What led the board to throw out the window about 30, 40 years of how we had searched for academic administrators? And reading some of the literature and thinking about some of the actions and stimulated by the title of this series, it struck me that one thing that tied a lot of things together, and particularly what Jim was saying, and again, I apologize if I'm going to be overlapping with some of the things that Jim said. It's unavoidable for having worked with him for how many years? 15, 19? I sort of anticipated what he might be saying, so anyway. What I thought would be interesting was to look at the corporate university, which we all talk about, and how it's led to what I call the silencing of the lambs. And the lambs are us, because academic freedom is only what you make of it. And if you sit there with your mouth shut, you're going to be silenced. You're silencing yourself. What do we mean by a corporate university? Okay. It's a concept that refers to universities that operate like for-profit firms. The assumption is that a university is a business, and it has to make money. And that's the rationale behind its existence. They should be run as businesses. And you have probably heard administrators talk about your clients or your customers. They're students. They're no longer students. They're, as we might say, and one of my colleagues was at a conference in, where was it? Not in East Africa. And the tourists referred to Westerners as walking wallets. And I think this is how many administrators now see students, their source of income. And the income keeps being tapped, the tuition goes up, or we search hither and yon for people to bring to our province to take our courses, particularly China, India, Middle East, Saudi Arabia. And what we're interested in the current university are training these people in what I would call vocationally oriented courses. And you may not have heard the Minister of Education, Labor and Advanced Education's remarks today, or read about them in the paper online. But she is talking about, forming partnerships with business and how we in universities have to take the initiative to do more entrepreneurial training and more hands-on training, whatever the hell that means. And, but there's very little evidence of how you build an economy and how you build entrepreneurship. About, maybe 25 years ago, a colleague and myself, we were charged with looking at entrepreneurs in Nova Scotia and trying to compare them to people who went into the corporate sector. And we went off and we interviewed about 30 entrepreneurs in Nova Scotia that had been designated by the federal government as prime examples of entrepreneurship. And we had a whole protocol that we went through with these people, asking them, where they were from, their education, their background. And, not one of those entrepreneurs had gone to university to study business. What did they study? Science and the liberal arts. Now, this is what got them the bright ideas to start their companies. And there is a need for business training, because one of the things that a lot of entrepreneurs get in trouble with is they're so successful, they reach a point where they can't run everything by themselves, and they don't want to let go, and they don't have the business training, and they need people to come in and help. But vocationally oriented courses, we see this reflected in a lot of the curriculum that is being put forward. We de-emphasize the liberal arts, we de-emphasize basic science. Okay? Well, to me, the corporate university accentuates enhanced revenue generating capacity. This is the primary element. Bring in the money, don't run a deficit. Okay? It's also the infusion of corporate values into higher education. Okay? And if you're going to do research, let's have an industrial liaison office so we can peddle this stuff to corporate entities or to government. Let's not worry about research that has no place to go. We want to commercialize anything we do. And we also then have, infiltrating the university, the managerial attitude, which infects labor relations and practices. And it's an importation of practices that might be useful in a private company, but are antithetical to what we believe in a university. Okay? Well, what happens as part of corporatization? You develop a scorecard mentality where programs are evaluated in terms of their extrinsic value. Okay? Can they bring in money? Can they bring in students? Okay? How good are they in terms of profit and loss? Eliminate those programs such as classics, languages, basic sciences. They're losers. Okay? We don't need those. Let's place our emphasis on applied research rather than basic research. And you can see this flowing from the Tri-Council's grants themselves and what they emphasize in terms of their programs. And then you have reviews of the university programs which are mandated by the Board of Governors. The reviews of the whole university system, or of the whole university. Examples. Now you had part of the series here on Transform Us at Saskatchewan. We have the example at Guelph University. X just went through a review. They tried to do one at St. Mary's. We now call it the Going Nowhere review. because we were astute enough to make such a stink that we scuppered it for all intents and purposes. All of these reviews have been influenced by Robert Dickinson's prioritizing academic programs and services. And we were, last year, about this time, our president sent out a memo to all faculty saying, well, we're going to have to take a serious look at all our programs. Not that we were in any financial difficulty. We were okay financially, but we're going to take a look at this. And as we later discovered, where did this nonsense come from? It came from the Board of Governors. It wasn't a creation of the president. It was a creation of the board. This was, these ideas about reviews catch fire and they go from one board to the other. And, well, if X is doing it, we got to do it. If Guelph is doing it, we got to do it. Okay. Now, we knew something was up when after one of the meetings of this executive group, we saw everybody walking around carrying Dickinson's book under their arm. And then back in the fall, in October, we had a town hall meeting where they were going to explain all of this to us. And they had the president, the vice presidents talk about this. And when we walked in, they had an agenda posted on the screen. And down at the bottom it has Alex Usher. I don't know if you know Alex Usher. Yeah. Alex Usher is violently anti-union, violently anti-tenure, violently anti-academic freedom. Says you don't need tenure to protect academic freedom. And he has a consulting company, and we called him Dickinson Light. And he stood up there and he explained the process he was going to use. And it was essentially Dickinson's process of a scorecard. And he said, no, we're not doing a scorecard. We're not going to evaluate. We're just going to sift through all of this. Well, how are you going to make sense out of it? Well, we're going to crunch some numbers. And well, after that meeting at the town hall, Mark Lamoureux, our president, who had to leave, he was here earlier, got up and went on for about 15 minutes tearing into all this. And at the end of the day, he was given a standing ovation for about 5 minutes. And I think the administrators there were really thrown by that, because in the next week they invited Mark, myself, and Jeff Power, our past president, to meet with them. And what they had done, what they had agreed upon was to put more academics on the academic review panel. There was a minority of academics on the panel to assess academics. We got that changed to a majority, vast majority. And on the main committee, the main task force, there were still only 2 faculty members, and we couldn't do anything about that. But the important thing is they got rid of Usher. And they terminated his contract because they knew as long as he were there, there would be no assistance from any faculty. At a cost of $40,000, which was his contract. They had money for that. Mm-hmm. This is an example of the scorecard that's used. This is from the report that was given to the president at X, who had gone through this Dickinson analysis. These are the academic criteria. The criteria are very similar for the service entities. The weights are different. But look at those criteria. They're all about cost, revenue, external demands. And these develop into the weights, which lead to a program being called sustainable or unsustainable. Okay? And if it's unsustainable, you're going to get rid of it. Okay? You should get, if that report is still on the X website, at least it was the last time I looked. It's in an obscure place, but you can find it. If you can't, I have a copy of it. You can just send me an email and I'll send you a copy of it. It's quite interesting to read. Guelph went through one of these program reviews. They used Dickinson and his firm to actually come on campus. 21-member task force. This seems to be the number that Dickinson likes, was a number of the task force at St. Mary's when they started this thing. And at the end of the day, as you might expect, they found that the language and literature programs were not sustainable, and they ranked them in the bottom, along with stats, math, sociology, anthropology, theater. All these programs that have high costs, low enrollments perhaps, don't generate revenue. What were the important ones? Because you evaluate the service sector along with the academic sector. And intercollegiate athletics, food services, residences, annual giving, alumni relations, they're all top scorers. One of my colleagues worked at Guelph for about 7 years, and I said, Kevin, you must have had great food at Guelph. Why did you leave? He said, food wasn't that great, but I was on the budget committee. It makes a shitload of money. That's the criteria that's being used here. Okay, governance structure, topic. As Jim recounted, and Letitia, it's the Board of Governors, responsible for financial and administrative matters, okay, generally uniform throughout Canada. We have a Senate that sets educational policy and makes key academic decisions, okay. These, for all intents and purposes, are independent entities. There's very little conversation from one structure to the other. There might be the occasional recommendation going from Senate to the board on a budget, and that's maybe other issues, but generally there's no communication between those two. How do they communicate? What's the linchpin? It's the president, okay? The president is a member of the board, member of Senate, sometimes the chair of the Senate, also the vice chancellor. And if you look at this, most of the involvement is between the president and the board of and the chair of the board of governors. They are the people that are in constant communication with one another. It is the chair of the board that is giving marching orders to the president. And what does the board want? They want a president who thinks as a manager, not as an academic. Okay? The president does have relationships with Senate, but it's mostly not Senate directing the president, so I only have a one directional arrow here, but it's the Senate occasionally coming when they're in town and announcing things to Senate and taking things under advisement, answering a few questions. Well, that's supposed to be collegial thinking, but it's really not. We call Senate our collegial decision maker. The president's supposed to be part of that, but in true essence, it's not, as Jim explained, at Oxford or Cambridge, it's not a true collegium. Okay? For all intents and purposes, what the board is looking for when it hires a president is a manager, and somebody who thinks like a manager. Okay, well, what do we mean by that? How many times have you heard the president referred to as the chief executive officer? Not the chief academic officer, or not the person who speaks for the university and speaks for its academic programs. This is corporate speak. It's chief executive officer. And, as you've heard in the both presentations, the need for flexibility. And what does flexibility mean? Short-term contracts, non-tenure track positions, soft money positions. Okay. In terms of flexibility, what any corporate manager would love is to be able to hire and fire and move people around, and when you don't see growth in an area or you see a decrease, to lay off those people. Now, we've made it very difficult for presidents to do that in universities. So the resort is, we're not going to hire, where possible, tenure track people. We're not going to give them tenure. We're going to institute flexibility through casual contract academic staff. There's less reliance on traditional Senate committees. How does the president function these days? They set up a task force. They want a policy on something, they set up a task force to investigate the policy on incivility. It's not a Senate creature anymore. It doesn't go through the typical Senate structures or Senate approvals. It is a task force, reports to the president adopts it, there you go. The task force is responsible to the president, not the Senate. And you see a very distinct change in the tone of the administration. There's less camaraderie with faculty, less thinking of themselves as a member of the faculty. Okay? And there's very little that can be done to hold the president and the senior administration accountable for carrying out Senate policies. I mean, the only mechanism we have, if you're unionized, you might be able to find something to launch a grievance on, but ultimately it comes down to a vote of non-confidence, which is not that frequent and difficult to bring off. Okay, the Board of Governors. Most boards of governors, particularly Nova Scotia universities, are not inundated with the high flyers of the corporate elite. They're, you'll have your handful of faculty, some students, alumni. If you were church-related, there might be some appointees from the diocese or the archdiocese. There are appointees of the government, and then the board appoints other members itself. And most of the people, if you look at their background, maybe one or two who have high corporate experience, most of them are small, local business people, lawyers, inundate boards. Chair of our board is a lawyer, okay? They see themselves as being encumbered by collective agreements and faculty who put their nose in things and want to have a say in how the university operates. They've hired the president. Damn it, the president's the one that's going to do things and take our direction to the faculty. Now, as part of this build-up to the closed presidential search that we had, the Board of Governors effectively changed the bylaw on presidential searches. And you could say, well, why don't you take issue with it when that happened? Well, there was an agenda on which this was itemized. There were minutes from that meeting, and the board did communicate that to the president, but they were top secret. Couldn't be shared with anybody. Even now, every agenda of the Board of Governors is labeled confidential and cannot be shared. This is a publicly funded institution. This is something, I think, if they persist, we may have to take action under FOIPOP or get the government involved. How can the board of a public institution keep its minutes, its agenda, and its communications and its policies secret? It's just bizarre. Okay, well, we have that kind of board mentality. They want a managerial president. How did they do it? You hire an executive search firm, okay? Colloquially known as a headhunter. Hire an executive search firm. Again, not hire a good academic search firm, hire an executive search firm. And if you look at these, which have become increasingly used over time, okay, in universities, what you find is that the way that executive search firms operate is by cultivating a roster of candidates. You may find that they will work with some candidates, they'll vet them, and they'll get them placed as a dean or some low-level administrator. They watch their progress in that position, and then the next thing you know, when there's an opening for a vice presidency, they put forward their candidates to the search committee. They do a good job as a vice president or a dean. Next thing you know, that candidate is being put forward by the same search committee for a presidency. And what you see is there are a couple of these search firms. They all have their own roster of candidates, and they flog these candidates throughout the open positions. They're not cheap. We have a clause which allows us to get this type of information. The search at St. Mary's costs upwards of $100,000 for president. Okay? And that's probably cheap. They generally charge, I think, based on what they think the budget of the university is. Will be more at Dal. And what does a search firm like to do? They like to run a closed search. Now, we were told, well, when we met back last summer, they held a meeting in the dead of summer. Very few people attended, and it was to say, what characteristics do you want in a new president? That's a typical gambit. And during that meeting, evidently, they said, oh, by the way, this is going to be a closed search, without any explanation or any rationale. That was it. And because most people didn't know about that, well, you had your chance. You knew it was happening. Why didn't you object? You didn't object, so it's closed search. And by that, they mean there's no involvement of the academic community in the search process, other than what people are placed on the search committee. Ignore the collective agreement language on conducting the search. Is there language that says how the search should be conducted or what has to happen? In our case, there is, and I'll show you 2 examples. Just ignore it. Even if you know about it, ignore it. What are they going to do to us if we run this search and hire a president? And of course, we want faculty on the search committee, but let's get the right faculty on there. Let's get the faculty who will drink the Kool-Aid, right? One of my colleagues at this open meeting refers to them as being victims of the Stockholm Syndrome, and they didn't like that, but it's true. I mean, they buy into it. They become enamored with the administrators that they're sitting next to, and they're wannabe administrators. They want to move up the chain. And you require everybody to sign a confidentiality agreement, so they can't speak about anything to anyone except other people on the search committee. And then you find a candidate, you make your decision, and you present that candidate to the academy. It was a bizarre meeting back in February, early February, where they presented the chosen one to the academy. And we go to the assembly at 4 o'clock, and we're told by the chair of the meeting, who was the vice president in terms of fund giving, who also happened to be the spouse of the chair of the board of governors, that the meeting would only last for an hour because the board was meeting at 5 o'clock to deal with the recommendation from the search committee to appoint the new president. So in that hour, about 40 minutes was taken up by the chair of the board of governors, the current president, and then they introduced the president-to-be, who made some nice remarks, and then there was, about 15 minutes left for questions. And when we got in there and we saw the hall, they were very much afraid that Mark would do another number on them and by reading the riot act to them. So they had planted the house with varsity athletes, each of whom had been given a question to ask. And the moderator only referred to them and would not call upon a faculty member until the very end. The other thing was that the press, through ANSET, knew the meeting was taking place. They barred the press from the meeting, wouldn't let the press in to hear what was going on. So that's how you present your candidate to the academy. Okay. In our collective agreement, we have 2 clauses which are very relevant. The employer acknowledges the right of employees to participate in the formulation and/or recommendation of policies and procedures within the university through duly constituted collegial bodies and committees. The continued involvement and participation of faculty members and professional librarians in the selection of senior academic administrators is accepted and supported by parties to to this collective agreement. You know, pretty strong, eh? We would think. Board of Governors couldn't care less. Ignored it. Second clause, even more powerful. It says that in meetings with the candidates for academic and administrative appointment, subject to their bylaws and to the initial appointment, it is agreed that on a suitable arrangement to be determined by the relevant search committee, members of the appropriate faculty or faculties or professional librarians shall be given the, not may, shall be given the opportunity to meet with those candidates for academic administrator appointments selected by the search committee for formal presentation to the employer and other candidates who in their initial visit request an opportunity for such a meeting. What this has meant in searches going back 30 years for deans, librarian, chief librarian, academic vice presidents, and the president is that the search committee would bring forward at least 3 names of candidates it was considering. Those candidates would meet with each one of these bodies on campus. They would be asked to give a presentation to the whole academy. They would meet with the executive of the union, with librarians, with the faculty of science or the faculty of commerce, with the staff, okay, people that would be working with the person, and feedback would be solicited from those groups, and that would be taken into account by the search committee. Now, the search committee could ignore it, but at least it was a process that we ensured that we would get to know the person, we could deal with this. Why didn't they want this? Well, because you have open searches, you won't get good candidates. This is the collective agreement. What did they do? Put their fingers in their ears again. My apologies to the chimp. You know, it's quite clear. We wrote to them, pointed these clauses out to them, asked them to make the search open. There was plenty of time to do that. They just refused and went on with what they were up to. And I think this is just a symptom of the decline of collegiality, as Jim went through so eloquently. It's shared responsibility and governance, which we consider to be appropriate to universities. And corporatization has undermined collegiality by removing the equality that existed between individual faculty. And the mechanism for doing that is destroying tenure. Okay? And you can see in universities, even presidents, if they don't speak out publicly, they mutter about tenure and having to continue to employ people when there's no need for them to be employed. And as Jim pointed out, the number of tenure-track faculty has decreased in both Canada and the U.S. 2 weeks ago in the Globe and Mail, and it's in the Globe and Mail, these must be accurate figures, they reported a permanent drop in full-time professors in Ontario from 75% to 66%. That the Council of Ontario University said there was an 87% increase in the number of courses taught by part-time faculty or casual staff. Count's own data shows that at Wilfrid Laurier, contract academic staff teach 45% of the courses. At QP, your contract academic staffs teach 64% of the undergraduate courses. And at St. Mary's, we have a clause that says contract staff or part-time casual staff can't teach more than 30% of the courses. We've been trying for a year to get the figures on this, because every time they give us a figure, there's something wrong, and their figures always show that they're teaching less than 30%, which we're pretty sure is not the case. So we may have to go to grievance and arbitration to get accurate figures on how many they're teaching, because our clause has a kicker that if as soon as they go over 30%, the university has to hire full-time tenure-track faculty to restore the balance to 30%, 70%. Rise of administrators. What we have now, rather than colleagues, are professional managers. In a lot of cases with little or no academic background. In some cases, they're even appointed as deans at McMaster and elsewhere. They're appointed for their expertise. Increasing number of administrators depend on the president for their appointment. Okay? If you have no tenure and the president can fire you, you're going to think twice about standing up and opposing the president as the dean at Saskatchewan did. Okay? And I said this leads to the silencing of the lambs, the decline of academic freedom, where academic freedom is taking a back seat to market forces. U.S. courts have ruled that academics who speak out publicly against their institution are not protected by academic freedom. They rely too strongly on First Amendment rights in the U.S. rather than academic freedom in their, well, I would say in their collective agreement, but most of them don't have collective agreements because the Supreme Court ruled about 25 years or so ago that private institutions were not eligible to have collective agreements or unions, which has vitiated a lot of the faculty and led to, I would say, led to the increase in part-time positions. As Jim pointed out, we have the right to criticize, the internal and external critique, but the AUCC's new statement makes no reference to that right to criticize and is trying to undermine it. I won't go over these. These are well-known. David Healy, Nancy Olivieri, famous cases. Genetically modified foods case at University of Manitoba. Denial of rights of political expression at York University. Temporary use of space policy. Use of police to disperse students protesting corporatization. At Simon Fraser, withdrawal of the J.S. Woodworth chair from David Noble by the board after he was offered it and signed a contract to that effect. Threats by the Tory government to withhold funding for Turk because it founded a conference on Israeli-Palestine relationships at York. In the U.S., Norman Finkelstein's denial of tenure at DePaul for his political views on Israel-Palestine. One which I should have put up here and forgot was the Board of Governors at Trent University selling 2 residential colleges against the opposition of the faculty. So now we have universities modeling themselves after corporations, seeking to maximize profit, growth, marketability. And one of the reasons why I think AUCC doesn't want faculty to criticize their employer, which we have the right to do, because it sullies the brand. Okay? How are you going to go off and sell something from your university if there's all this criticism of it? So let's silence those people and make sure that they can, we can go out there and market the university, market our products. What can we do? Well, there are some things, and some things are very difficult. Let's restore funding. A lot of this is driven by the need for funds. And as the minister said today, well, you know, go find a partnership with a business. We're not going to let you raise tuition, okay? We're not going to give you more money. So either you find new sources of income, or what's the alternative? You cut costs, you cut programs, okay? She didn't say that, but that's the alternative. Can we lobby governments? In the current climate, we have to, but I don't think it's going to work that well. We can work, and I think this is something we have to do wherever we are in contract negotiations, is work to convert contract positions to full-time positions. This was one of the key issues at Acadia when they finally got faculty members restored, their complement restored to a reasonable level. We have language in our contract, which I know the university hates. They cannot abolish a position if there is a resignation or a death or whatever without going through an elaborate procedure. They have to, if there's a vacancy and it's within the complement that's been established, we have the right to automatically hire to fill that vacancy. They hate that, and I'm sure in the upcoming negotiations that may be something that they'll try to attack. Reinvigorate senates. Now, the composition of senates vary from, I think at Dallas, every full professor is a member? Not anymore? Okay. But at St. Mary's, it's appointed, there's about, every administrator is on it, so it's about 50% faculty, 50% students and administrators. And what we've been trying to do this year is to get the faculty senators to caucus with the executive of the union to go over issues, to explain different positions, what they should be doing, or let them think about things. But I think we have to get Senate's working again, and that's going to be a long, difficult process. And I think this is, I won't go into this because Jim went over this I think very well. We, the union, have to take on a broader role in academic affairs, whether it's with Senate, with policy, but we have to become more intrusive. Generally, what we've laid back and said, we're going to talk about the welfare of our members, we're going to look at salaries, working conditions. Well, the atmosphere of the university is a working condition, and we have to be prepared to deal with those policies as they occur and to take a stand on those issues. So I think that's going to be a long road, right? But we can do it. So thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks to all of you. I just want to open it up to, there's a microphone in the middle. If anybody wants to make any comments or has any questions. People are probably tired, but let's have a few comments and questions.
Thank you all. I just have a quick question for Vic. What remedy did you ask for in your grievance about the search?
It's now at arbitration. Jim Turk is the side person that we have nominated for the arbitration. It's a three-person panel. They've appointed a vice president from MUN.
The university side person.
Yeah, and they're now looking at a chair. We took the position that, in consultation with our lawyer, that we are not asking that the search be called null and void. What we want is a declaration that they did wrong, and this is what they should have done. And our concern is not trying to undo what they did, but to prevent them from doing it again, because this language applies to the vice presidents and to the deans. And the vice president's term is coming open within a year, and we want it to be an open public search for the vice president academic. For every dean, we want it to be public and open. And we wanted the arbitrator to say, they can't do this, this was wrong.
I have a question. Sorry, I'm too short. I'm too short to ask a question. I have a question for Jim. I want to know what CAUT can do or is doing to protect the academic freedom of contingent faculty. Can we do things differently, get contingent faculty onto the executive or onto the academic freedom and tenure committee? I know there are lots of challenges because contingent laborers are contingent, but are there possibilities there? Are there things we can do differently?
The first thing that can be done, and has been done, and we, CAT, about 12 years ago, set a goal of organizing all the unorganized contract academic staff in the country. Because a precondition to being able to get more rights is being able to bargain them. And at the time, about a third of, there were 13 contract academic staff unions that were part of faculty associations. There were 13 that were part of CUPE, and then there were 3 that were independent unions, one at Simon Fraser, one at Ottawa, and one at Concordia. All the rest were unorganized. And over the next 10 years, we succeeded in organizing all the unorganized into faculty associations. So now virtually every contract academic staff person in the country is unionized. So that was a precondition. Then the next step is to negotiate collective agreements that have academic freedom language in it. But as I tried to say in my talk, you have to have 2 things. You have to have academic freedom language, but you also have job security rights, because otherwise nobody ever gets fired for academic freedom reasons. They just don't get their contract renewed. So we started trying to negotiate language that would say that a person has a right of first refusal if they teach the course successfully and it's offered the next year. And that was negotiated, but a lot of universities got slippery. They'd say, well, okay, Jim, you taught sociology of labor last year. Unfortunately, we're not teaching that course next year. We have a new course on sociology of work. So the language was, so then people started negotiating. If you've successfully taught a course and you're evaluated, you have a first right to that course or any essentially similar course. Others started going beyond that to negotiate language that would give a right after you've taught X number of courses to ongoing work. In order to get opportunities to do scholarly work, because contract positions can become a job ghetto. You get your PhD, the only jobs you can get are these. You have to teach sometimes 5, 6, 8, 9 courses at a bunch of different institutions in order to make a less than adequate living. You're not supported of research. You don't have time to do research and write. So then a tenure track job comes up and you apply. And they say, well, you're 6 years from your degree. What have you done? What have you published? And you're out of luck, right? So part of the challenge is how do we negotiate language that provides opportunities to do scholarly work? And so CT has been encouraging, but it's very difficult to get employers to agree, that basically a model is say, well, after 2 contracts of teaching, you have to be given the next contract of equivalent duration and pay to do scholarly work. Would be one solution to that problem. Universities, at the same time, have been proposing at most rounds of bargaining the increase in teaching-only positions and full-time teaching-only positions. And they really try to make those attractive to contract academic staff, saying, well, geez, you know, you're really badly exploited if you had a chance for a regular position. The problem is, in most cases, contract academic staff don't get those jobs. So they create a new teaching-only position, which has a higher workload, lower pay, no rights to do research, but at least it's a full-time job. And they have, when they go to fill it, they look at not their existing so in an English department, they don't look at their existing contract academic staff in English who've labored away successfully for a decade, but rather they look, well, in their last competition for a tenured track job, there were 200 applicants and 1 got it. They look at the people who came 2nd or 3rd or 4th to give them this other job. So it's, I mean, the only real solution, it's not sitting on CET committees. I mean, we're absolutely clear, as I said, that everybody who teaches has to have academic freedom. It's how to have the power to be able to negotiate it. And given that administrations are hell-bent to expand their cheap labor, and that's the only attraction. It's not that they don't like tenure track faculty. They want cheap labor. And I know when I took a leave from U of T to work in the trade union movement, I at that time taught 5 half courses. They could get 16 half courses taught by contract academic staff for the same amount they paid me. Well, duh. That's what's behind it. So the only way we can deal with it, I think, is it's really an issue of power and what we're able to negotiate and press short of that. And that really requires solidarity between regular academic staff and contract academic staff. You know, and there's a great debate, are contract academic staff better to be in the same union? And we have 3 models in Canada. One, as at Western Ontario, where they're in the same union and in the same bargaining unit. So when there's a strike, the whole university is shut down. In other places, the model is where they're in the same union, the same faculty association, but they're separate bargaining units. The third model is at Dalhousie and 12 others, where they're in a separate union. Whatever the model is, the parties have to work together so they can't be played off against each other. And there has to be solidarity, or else we're not going to. So it's a hard road to hoe, but I don't think there's any other way to achieve a solution for contract academic staff. Certainly, no government's going to legislate it.
At Dell, we have contract academic staff that are part of the DFA,
Yep.
and then we have those that are QP. Right. So we have those 50% or more are part of our contract.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. Eric?
Well, so one thing is, in terms of the eventual evaluation of contract faculty when they apply for tenure track jobs, it's rarely just administrators that evaluate contract faculty as coming up short because their publication lists aren't long enough. It's generally tenured faculty that do that.
Absolutely.
Which speaks to the broader issue that I think is missing, frankly. And that is the degree to which there's a need to build a movement, not just be strong at the bargaining table or reinvigorate Senate. And through a kind of collegial or collaborative kind of model. If collegiality is, in its truest form, born of a model where power is fused, the cleavage that's created in a bicameral system effectively cleaves power away from the academy and has placed it, as we've seen with the Board of Governors, who have then increasingly, as the program of corporatization has unrolled, used it as a means by which to, in a very adversarial way, impose a new mode of civility and a new definition of collegiality. It's easy to be collegial when you share power equally. Collegiality is completely different. It becomes civility with all of the attendant problems that you talked about, Jim, when in fact you're talking about a corporatized university subject to the managerial kind of estimations of a trained and professional managerial class, effectively. So I wonder whether or not we're kidding ourselves in thinking that, yeah, on some issues there's room to be collaborative, absolutely. And I'm not saying that we have to consistently be and first confrontational. But we're kidding ourselves if we think that this isn't an adversarial relationship, if we're not if we don't really need to effectively man the ramparts and organize our faculty unions, which I think are increasingly split between those who support the corporatized university, those who have been hired into programs that are designed to be vocational in their orientation. I crunched some numbers, and over the last 3 years in Ontario, of 120 new programs, 107 are of a practical orientation. Those professors are not going to be rank and file members of the DFA or who are going to want to march a picket line. And until we attend to those internal issues and reorient how we view and potentially combat the incursion of managerialism, I don't know that we're going to get very far. So, I mean, maybe you could talk about how we don't just bargain, which I absolutely support, and we don't just reinvigorate senates, but we also, and I think more fundamentally, build a movement.
You want to comment?
Well, it's an excellent question. It's exactly what we do need to do, not apart from obviously collective bargaining or from strengthening Senate. And I think one of the things that we need to do is just continue to have many conversations like this. I mean, that's part of what the DFA has been trying to do in this last year, is to move beyond just talking to and with faculty and the community outside collective bargaining, not just at collective bargaining, but trying to talk about these really important issues so that those kind of questions come up so that we can begin to think about how to do that.